How you doing? Hey, welcome back to the Educated Colonel Snap channel. We will be discussing Silver Samurai today. First impressions, deck builds, synergies, and just an overall rundown of Silver Samurai during its first day of release. Hope you guys enjoy, and let's begin. I love the intro. So first off, we can talk about Silver Samurai. He is a 4 energy, 5 power card. On reveal, each player discards the lowest power card from their hand. So it's not lowest cost, it's lowest power. So you can hit things that are very high power, but high cost, but low power. Things like Iron Man, things like Hobgoblin, Null sometimes can be hit. That one is a little bit wonky with its interactions, but it's not necessarily the lowest cost card comparative to something like Colon Wing. So there is some more flexibility, some more decisions you can do in terms of deck building and how you want to utilize this card. So it's a pretty cool card. 4 energy, 5 power is not the best stats, right? You would say maybe 6 power would be really nice, but it does have a nice ability for disruption. Also synergizes with your deck if you want to build it that way. So even though it has arguably low power, this is maybe a 3 cost or 3 energy type power. Its ability, in my opinion, more than makes up for it. So it also has a plethora of synergy. So can obviously synergize with discard, and there's a lot of different discard decks in the meta. So there's a lot of different flexible decks you can make with it. X23 obviously also works well with it since it's a very low power card, and when it gets discarded, it gets dropped to the field and gives you an energy. So that's a pretty nice synergy there. Stature, I think, is pretty required. I feel if you really want to utilize this card, since it's always going to be discarding a card from your opponent. So, unless they have no cards, but most of the time it's going to be discarding a card from your opponent. So you are pretty much getting a 1 energy 6 power card if you are playing Silver Samurai, which is just, in my opinion, too good to pass up. Just a very easy reason to make this card feel worth it. And then Zabu, of course, since it's 4 energy, you can make it 3. And then Ghost Rider also has been a very powerful addition to this type of deck. There's a lot of good cheap cards that make sense. Namely, people have been abusing Iron Man and Hobgoblin, which are definitely very powerful plays if you Ghost Rider it. You turn your turn 4 into tons and tons of power, so that's pretty cool. And then this also just works with disruption decks. So if you want to just be a menace and have Moon Knight and Silver Samurai and Black Bolt, and if you want to be mean, you can add Spider Ham, and you could keep going and just be one of those annoying players. So that also definitely works. So there's a lot of synergies with this card. So it's not just a one deck type card. It's a card that has a lot of different deck decision makings to be added in it. So I think there's a lot of good things going for it. Now, in terms of should you buy this card, do I think it's worth getting? Overall, I'm going to say that it is a good spotlight option. So I would recommend, if you are looking to spend your spotlights this month, this is definitely a card I would recommend getting. I think the cards it's next to are pretty good, especially Kitty Pryde. If you don't have Kitty Pryde, this is a very great opportunity to get that. Now, in terms of tokens, do I think it's worth 6,000 tokens? I would say it's lower. I would say Jeff is better. Jeff is definitely one of the best cards in the Series 4, Series 5 section right now. So if you don't have Jeff and you're like willing to spend, I would definitely say go get Jeff first. In terms of after that, it might be worth 6,000 tokens. I would say it's too soon to tell in terms of spending your hard-earned tokens. That does take a lot of time. It could be a really good card. It does feel very promising, initial testing, but obviously this early into a card being released, it's hard to really say, oh yeah, this is going to be absolutely great, but it does look good. Now, in terms of getting this card, I would say you need to have Stature already. Pretty much every deck that I'm looking at, every deck that I think makes sense has Stature next to this card, just because the The synergies are so clean, and it really does make this deck or this card feel a lot better if you can just play down a 1 power 6 afterwards. So if you don't have Stature, I would say this card's value drops a lot. And if you are willing to spend that extra 3,000 tokens on Stature, then that does make it feel better. But if you don't have Stature and you're like, ooh, people are saying this card is good, but you don't have Stature, well, it's not going to feel as promising without the Stature. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're like, oh yeah, a lot of people are saying it's good, but I don't have Stature, do I want to spend an extra 3,000 tokens to get Stature? Because it's going to be hard to get Stature without spending the token since it's already passed in the spotlight. So that's something you have to keep in mind when you are deciding on this card. So, just be aware. Now, the main two things, it's a flexible card in multiple decks that might get better and more deck designs be in the future. So I think this card has a lot of promise, but it's kind of hard to recommend you spending all your resources on this card because of next month's new cards. I think those cards are really strong, really impactful, and you can definitely come to a situation where you feel regret because you spent all your resources on this month and you don't have anything saved up for next month, and you're having to skip like very premium cards that are being added. So if you are spending all your resources, you have to be very careful. Make sure that's what you want. But if you have some resources to spare, I do think this is a very good spotlight cash to grab. Now let's talk about some of the synergies. Right, this isn't all of them, but I think these are like some very common synergies you're going to see. Zabu obviously makes it very cheap. X23 is a very easy target. Daken with the Muramasa shard also is a very good target. Then we have some things that get benefit when they're discarded, right? You have the Swarm benefit, you have the Stature benefit, you have the Wolverine benefit. Those do work very well. Then we have Iron Man and Hobgoblin. Those work super well with Ghost Rider to have a very easy swing turn. If you can, like, maybe Zabu on 2, Silver Samurai on 3, you discard Iron Man, you Ghost Rider on 4, you play the Iron, you get the Iron Man back. You can also even play the Stature on that same turn 4, and you can see how big of a swing that can be. And then Hela as well, just any discard decks can really take advantage of an extra discard, especially when you can target it because you know exactly what's going to discard. That's why sometimes you're playing Colin Wing in Hela decks, because you know, oh, you're not losing the Hela. Things like that can be really powerful. So this isn't the only synergies we have for this card, but this is some of the more common synergies you're going to be seeing when you play into this particular deck list. So overall, do think it's a pretty good card. Let's look into the next section where we'll look at the spotlights itself and then some of the decks to be built with this card. So when we look at the spotlights, this was what I did at the beginning of the month. I had this in A tier, especially if you're missing Kitty Pryde. So Kitty Pryde really elevates this. I still think Kitty Pryde's a fantastic card that you really want to be getting. So if you don't have Kitty Pryde, you don't have Silver Samurai, like, I think this is an absolutely great spotlight to get. Kitty Pryde will be very relevant for probably the rest of the game until it gets changed in some way. And then Silver Samurai is a good enough card that I think it's worth spending your spotlight. So still super happy with that decision at the beginning of the month. Without Kitty Pryde, I'd say it moves down to B tier. Just not that crazy, but still a good card. So I would say it's not B minus tier. This is B tier. The card is better, and very good and relevant. And the Kitty Pryde variant is also very strong. So still happy with this. I would say it doesn't need to be B minus. I think it stands on its own as a B tier. And then if you have nothing, if you're only getting Silver Samurai, I just think it's hard to really recommend getting one singular card in the spotlights with no extra benefits. So it's still C tier, but I still think it's a good card if you want to spend. The difficulty when it gets to this point is that most people don't have like tons of spotlights. And if you're going to be risking it just for Silver Samurai, maybe it's better to risk it for some of the cards coming next month. So that's why it's a little bit harder. But I think if you really want that Kitty Pryde variant, that's super fine. And Silver Samurai is a pretty good card, so I wouldn't be disappointed to go for this particular spotlight section. I think that's super fine. Now, these two are the ones that really jump out to me in something you might really want to save up for next month. So this is why I keep saying, oh, the next month's spotlights are pretty good. We do have Alaroth with, which I think got a nerf, but it's still going to be pretty good. Lockdown, destroying, guaranteeing a win in a particular location can be really strong. And so I still think this is going to be seeing play. But I do think these two are just very, very meta adjusting cards. Like you'll be able to make new decks because you're running both of these cards. So I think that helps a lot in their viability, their staying power. So I wouldn't want you to be in a situation where you can't at least attempt to get these cards because you spent like all your resources in the month before. So that's why I'm saying be careful here. But still, overall, this is a pretty good Spotlight. Is a pretty good card. I do recommend it. I think it's going to be strong. I can definitely see viable decks being made. Something I do want to notice is that this, in my opinion, like the strongest deck right now is utilizing Forge and Brood. So you do have to keep that in mind, right? That it might make some difficulties. You might have some harder battles because that meta deck might make things tough. Now, I don't think that deck is going to survive all too well. I think there's an OTA coming soon, so it's possible that gets hit. I don't really know, but I do think generally Silver Samurai is in a good spot that we'll probably likely see in the future. Now, in terms of deck building, I actually had a lot of decks to make here. I thought there was a lot of different ideas, a lot of different cool things floating around that people have already playtested with as well. So pretty happy. We have like 6 decks to showcase. First one is just I believe we're putting this we're just slotting into the Jeff Stature deck. I mean, yeah, so pretty much I think if you want a deck to do well initially when it comes out, it has to be able to be very slottable into very powerful decks. And this Silver Samurai can do that really well, where you can just slot it in instead of Black Bolt and just it fits in very well. It doesn't really feel out of place here and still performs well. So that's something you can do if you're already very familiar with Jeff Stature. You don't want to change too much. You want to play with the new card. This is definitely something you could do, and then you could see how it feels. Obviously, you can also just run both of them, but if you don't want to do that and you just want to slot it in, this is something you can do. Next up, we have, I believe this one does run Black Bolt. This one also runs Legion. This runs Daken. It's a little bit different of the deck. It does have Silk. It does have Miles Morales. So a little bit of the Stature variant, but this one's a little bit more combo centric because you have the Daken combos with Killmonger, you've got the Legion and Black Bolt with the X-23, so it's a little bit more combo centric. It means I would say the ceiling is higher, but sometimes you're going to have iffy draws that might make things a little bit confusing, but still it still looks pretty good. I've seen it run a couple of times and it seems solid. You just have to be aware of all the combos in your deck so that you're not like missing something or not utilizing them correctly. Next up is just a discard variant, right? Silver Samurai can easily slot into discard. It fits that theme very well. So you could just make a discard deck, just replace one of your cards with Silver Samurai. Works pretty well. Once again, the initial deck building decision is to just slot it into an already well-performing deck and see how it works. And I think discard, Jeff Stature, those are easy criteria for decks you can just slot Silver Samurai in and have it perform really well. Next up is a little bit more interesting take here. Here we have Forge. Now, Forge has a lot of good targets here with the Kitty, with the Daken, so that's a lot of power here. You get the consistency with the Chavez, so your draws are going to be pretty good. Usually when you have the Angela Kitty Pride, you need the Chavez so that your draws are good, but you have a lot of different options here, and then you get to run the Silver Samurai, the Black Bolt, the Legion, all pretty good cards in this deck of using the Stature to its fullest, and then you have the Shang-Chi tech counter just because if you need it. So pretty nice deck. I believe Lambie's running something like this as well, so you can definitely look to him to see it being piloted in a very high level. So pretty powerful deck here. Next up, we have a nice little list here. We are utilizing the Ghost Rider once again. Ghost Rider pulling anything you're milling from the Silver Samurai, which here the main target is the Hobgoblin. So you get to mill the Hobgoblin with the Silver Samurai and then put it back to your opponents with the Ghost Rider. So something to be keep in mind is if you are going something like Zabu into Rock Slide into Silver Samurai, there's a good chance the Silver Samurai hits a rock. So if you have the opportunity, you want to go Zabu into Silver Samurai first before the Rock Slide so that you can generally not pull a rock that they just top decked or something like that, right? So a lot of times as well, turn 6, you're going to go maybe like Zabu Rock Slide turn 6 or so. So you're not necessarily guaranteed to be playing rocks all too early anyways. The Korg is the only like thing you have to be super careful about. But generally, this is a nice Darkhawk deck, but you're just slotting in the Silver Samurai and then adjusting based on it. So you're adding the Ghost Rider, the Silver Samurai. You have a lot of 4-drops, so this gives you tons of value. And then you still have that Black Bolt Stature, Silver Samurai Stature interaction. So there's a lot of little flexibilities to make it work. You're not like beholden on Silver Samurai doing all the work for you. And I believe the last one we have, this one, got I believe from Jeff. He was playing something very similar to this. I really liked all the different ways you can utilize the Ghost Rider here. So we're running Black Cat. This is like the main difference here. And you just have the Silk Miles Morales interaction with the Jeff. So you have the ability to flood on the final turn. If you go like Miles Morales Stature and then a 4-drop, usually will be what you can do. But then the Ghost Rider gives you a target for Black Cat if you need it. But then you have Hobgoblin and Iron Man as well. So you have a lot of ways to give your value. And then he's running Mirage as well. So this Mirage lets you play around the Silver Samurai. Because usually with Silver Samurai, what happens is you'll try to play the Samurai. But then if you have a 2-drop, you'll just mill the 2-drop. So this lets you just get something from the Mirage, which has a lot of higher power, so it doesn't get milled by the Silver Samurai. So that's usually pretty good. So definitely has a lot of functions, and Mirage is just a solid card. You usually get to see what your opponent's running. So I don't dislike the option here. It's not super core. You don't really need Mirage, honestly, but if you want to, seems pretty fun. You could replace Mirage with a lot of other things. People have been running armor to deal with stuff. People have been running Luke Cage. There's a lot of little things people are running. So you can definitely pick and choose what you want in that 2-drop slot. Lizard is also pretty popular. So that's kind of the Silver Samurai first impressions. I think it's a good card. I think it's worth your spotlights if you want to. Just be careful not to use all your resources. So if to have nothing for next season. I think next season has a lot of good cards that will be pretty impactful in the meta. But if you want that Katie Pride variant, feel free and let me know what decks you're using, what your opinions of the card is, things like that. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Educated calling snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you tomorrow snap. Your skills will be